Hello, this is Mo, and I will present to you HandyCast, phone-based bimanual input for virtual reality in mobile and space-constrained settings via post and touch transfer. This work was conducted by me, Mohamed, Kari, and Holz at ETH Zurich. Let's have a look at how HandyCast turns your phone into an efficient and precise controller for VR, especially useful in spaces as tight as a car's passenger seat.
There's room for some more on the back there, too.
The contributions of this paper comprise a post and touch transfer function for control over two virtual hands through input on a single smartphone in space-constrained settings, allowing significantly faster object selection and placement than the two-controller go-go baseline technique. We also contribute a first interaction user study in an open space seated setup and a second interaction study in a space-constrained seated setup. Evaluation criteria in both studies include completion time and required control volume. Fourth, we contributed tracking evaluation that investigates the drift incurred by HandyCast phone-based inside-out post-tracking compared to ideal conditions using lighthouse-based outside-in tracking. Finally, we also contribute a universally applicable SteamVR controller driver, which technically can serve as a drop-in replacement for current motion controllers, allowing to use HandyCast for any hand-centric VR app in the SteamVR store. We used this controller, for example, for operating Job Simulator in the beginning of this talk. We track the phone inside out using the iPhone sensors for visual inertial odometry. For post-transfer, the user first calibrates the phone at the anchor position in their lab. We then compute the phone vector starting in the anchor position and leading to the phone position. Using input amplification, we stretch the phone vector with an amplification function, resulting in the amplified phone position. We then create a plane with its plane origin in the amplified phone position. Note that we orient the plane parallel to the phone. On this plane, the hands are positioned neutrally at a fixed shoulder width. So, by moving through the confined space above their lap, the user moves both hands in their current position through space. Overall, post-transfer yields 6 degrees of freedom, 3 degrees for translation and 3 degrees for orientation. We introduced 2 additional degrees of freedom for each hand with touch transfer. By using their thumbs on the corresponding control zone on the touchscreen, the user can position each hand on any point on the plane. Touch input is relative, allowing users to lift off their thumb and continue the movement from the current position on the plane. Touch input is also speed-based, allowing users to fine adjust the hand position slowly when needed, but also to move them quickly to reach farther distances. We return each hand individually to a neutral position after an idle timeout to retain closeness to the body by default. Upon receiving a touchdown event on the screen, handy controls enter the object selection state. This means to select an object, users need to hover it by positioning the hand and touch down to attach to it. To detach from an object, they release their thumb from the touchscreen. For our evaluation, we re-implemented tilt casting as a baseline known from literature and adapted it for our purpose of bimanually controlling VR hand avatars. Note that the hand avatars are not influenced by phone motion. Instead, tilt casting uses only touch input to cover distances and phone orientation to determine the direction of the touch motion. We also implemented GoGo as a baseline technique that uses 2 independent controllers for target acquisition and placement. To evaluate the performance of our interaction techniques, we conduct 3 studies. First, we conduct a user study in a full-range seated setup under ideal tracking conditions using the Vive's Lighthouse system. In this user study, we compared our techniques to the bimanual adaptation of tilt casting and to the popular controller-based GoGo technique. Note that in this first study, the amplification parameters of GoGo are configured for an unobstructed, full-range setup as proposed in the original GoGo paper. We found that our technique requires significantly lower control space than the best baseline, controller-based GoGo, with no significant difference in completion time for object selection and placement. As a second evaluation, we conducted a user study under space constraints. Here, we wanted to find out how our technique, on the right, performs in comparison to a space-constrained version of GoGo, on the left. Note the cardboard enclosing the physically available space. Space-constrained GoGo uses much higher amplification and therefore can be operated in a much smaller volume than the full-range version of GoGo employed in the previous user study. We found that our technique, on the right, still uses significantly less control volume and enables shorter motion paths than space-constrained GoGo. Moreover, in this space-constrained setup, our technique, on the right, enables significantly faster completion times than space-constrained GoGo. Finally, we conduct a third evaluation to understand the effect of the tracking system. After registering the phone in space, we continuously collect the phone motion with outside-in tracking using the Vive's Lighthouse system and shown in transparent colors, and with inside-out tracking using Apple's ARKit that uses the phone's camera and the inertial sensors shown in solid colors at the same time. We continuously compute the distance between the outside-in baseline trajectory and our inside-out trajectory. Note that the hands are fully controlled by the inside-out tracking in the inside-out tracking condition, and the tracker is then only used for passively recording the baseline. In the tracking evaluation, all participants completed 8 sessions in total, comprising 24 bimanual trials each. We found that average drift from beginning to end of a session amounts to 2.5 centimeters on average.